as a little system test here, but also to better know our audience, if you are from a private sector employer or employer association group, please raise your hand. Just click the status above to raise your hand. I'd like to see how many folks are in that status. Okay, super. Great, okay, thank you. All right, our agenda for today is to go over some of the large buckets of funding that are available for the public through the Office of Employment Training here at DCEO, and we'll pay particular attention to our Atom Manufacturing Program and our Rapid Response Innovation RFA that was released a few days ago. So with that, let's just jump right in and talk about some overall workforce goals and objectives. For those of you who are part of local workforce areas, I apologize. We want to make sure that everyone understands kind of where we are coming from with our initiatives and our funding. So essentially, everything we do really boils down to having a workforce in Illinois that has the skills that employers need. So what we work to do every day, both at the state and local workforce levels, is to identify occupations and skills that employers need today, but also keep an eye on what they're going to need tomorrow so that we're training people and providing education and skill sets for competencies that employers will need in the future as well. And we want to make sure that people that need those skills get them and then match people up with the job opportunities as they become available. So that's kind of the big picture version of what we're all about. There are 4 large buckets of money that are available beyond the ordinary Workforce Investment Act funding that is available to the local workforce areas. You know, that's the lion's share of the funding. It's about $100 million spread across the state each year, you know, give or take a little bit depending on how the funding and the economy look. But for funding available from DCEO that can be made available to the public are 4 large buckets that we're going to speak to here. The first is rapid response. That is for workers that are impacted by large layoff events that are too big for a local workforce area's own funding allocation to handle. What we're going to talk quite a bit about today is the rapid response innovation request for application, and that can be used for individuals that are threatened by layoff, or also could be used to provide skill training to people that are already have been impacted by a layoff event. And this is, you know, with these grants, we're trying to do new and innovative things, have a little bit of flexibility to try some new approaches. So we'll be talking quite a bit about that in a few minutes. The other big bucket of money is the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act. This was created in the wake of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And, you know, the anticipation was with that free trade agreement, you know, some manufacturing jobs or other sector jobs could be threatened by offshoring. So this program was created to help individuals that were impacted and may have lost their job or become underemployed or unemployed because of offshoring. And it's a very, very nice program for the folks that are qualified. You know, the individuals have to be certified by U.S. Department of Labor as a trade event, and that can be done 2 or 3 different ways. But you know, the event does have to be certified before individuals can take advantage of that program. The last item on this slide is our national emergency grants. These are for economic impacts that are driven by usually some sort of natural or other economic disaster or economic event. The one that comes to mind is after 9/11, the airline industry had a huge economic impact to the negative, and lots of people were unemployed for a while. And the federal government provided some national emergency money to help retrain some of those folks. Typically, these are issued in the wake of a natural disaster like hurricane, tornado, flooding, that sort of thing. So just be mindful, for those of you not part of the WIA system, that these buckets of funding are out there if the right situation does exist. And if there is ever a need for you to take advantage of those, you can reach out to us at DCEO or to your local workforce area and get some assistance in that. So let's shift gears here and jump into a short description of our ATOM program. This is our innovative program where we are trying to demonstrate if we can be a little more reactive and quicker and responsive to employers' needs and reduce the amount of time that people are in training to get the skills they need for the jobs that are available. Because essentially in Illinois we have manufacturers that are saying, we have jobs that are available, but we don't have workers with skill sets to take those jobs. And on the other hand, we have a significant number of people in the state still unemployed that if they had the right skills, they could be qualified to take those jobs. So we're trying something new and innovative here to try to get those individuals, those skills, as quickly as possible and match them up with employers that might be interested in participating. We're applying lean manufacturing or lean processing techniques and principles to this initiative. The idea there is that we don't have any downtime. Everything we do is value added, and we have a multiple arsenal of things that we can do with individuals to get them additional skill sets from the time they are enrolled in the program until the time they take permanent employment. One of the things that fall under that category is work-based learning or internships that are paid by the program. So while an individual is waiting for a class to start, if they're going to take a class for training, they may have 2 or 3 weeks to wait until the next cohort of training starts. So rather than sit around doing nothing, we could place those individuals with an employer that was interested to help them better understand the manufacturing environment, get a better feel for it, and help them get some context to the training that they take in the classroom. There's a huge advantage of that for the employers as well, in that they get to try before buy, essentially. The initiative will pay for the but that really is a great opportunity for an employer to reduce their hiring risk because while individuals that come out of our program are going to have stackable credentials that are industry recognized, that really doesn't tell an employer, well, what kind of individual is this? I mean, then you have to rely on references and the person's resume and how they interview for that. Well, you can only tell so much from a 30-minute to 1-hour interview and by checking references. So this work-based learning that is paid by the program is a great way for employers to see, well, does this person really come to work on time, past the first day? Do they get along well? Do they look like they're trainable? And it may not lead to a direct employment immediately or even with that employer at all, but it does give both sides of the equation an advantage in getting to know each other a little bit better. And the intent is that if someone does a short-term work-based learning, goes back and completes their training, that employer is probably more likely to hire them, having known them already, assuming that the work-based learning opportunity or the internship went okay. So that's kind of the thinking behind the model there. Okay, so at this point, we are looking for manufacturers that need skilled workers. Our initiative is intended to be demand-driven, so that we're training in the exact things to the fullest extent possible that employers in each region across the state that are participating say they need. So rather than us train to capacity in what the slots we already have available, we want to make sure that we are working with the employers, letting them tell us what the demand is, and then trying to match our training efforts to that demand. By that I mean the occupations that are being trained for, the competencies that go along with that, the locations, how many people do they need, and when do they need them. Those are kind of all the variables that come into play. So we'll never get to 1 day behind demand or right on just in time, but we think we can do a lot better than we have in the past by trying some innovative things with that and being a little bit more in lockstep with the employers. But for that to work, the employers have to work with us and give us that information on the demand. Otherwise, we have to kind of fall back on our best estimates using labor market information and what interviews we can get with employers. So if you're an employer or an employer association or know them and have links with them, please help us pass the word on this, not just to people you think might be interested, but if you're using social media, we have some links to our program out there. Occasionally, if one of those pops up in your LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter account, please share that along with the folks in your network, because while you may not need or be interested in the services yourself, chances are you either know someone who is or they know someone who is. The great thing also is there's no need to apply for a grant. The funding is already out on the street. The map on the right side of the slide shows the regions in the state that are participating. So if you are an employer or have individuals or access to clients that are living in these shaded regions, you are set up. You really just need to go to the web link or the website at the bottom of this slide to sign up or learn more about it. If you know an employer, are an employer, know employers or clients that live in the gray shaded areas, those are outside the ADAM regions. But if the employer or individual lives close enough to one of these shaded regions, there's a chance that we might be able to help them out as well. It just kind of depends on how far away and how the logistics might work out. If the jobs are high paying and really good jobs, folks might drive 70, 80 miles for that job. So it just makes all the difference in the world. So don't assume that if you are in a county outside one of these shaded areas that you can't be helped or the employer can't be helped. But we'd certainly take a look at it, and if there's something that can be done with it, we'd be happy to make that happen. So to the second dot point on this slide, we are working toward industry recognized credentials in this initiative. The idea here is that we want individuals that come out of this training program to be a known quantity. And while not every employer knows all of these credentials that are out there, these are the officially sanctioned stackable credentials that are recognized by the manufacturing sector at the national level. You have the Manufacturing Skills Standards Council, the Institute of Metalworking Skills, Welding Society, and Production Inventory Control. All of these could come into play for an individual. The whole idea behind this is that the people would have a personalized training plan and really not spend any more time in training than they need to acquire the skills for the jobs that are in their region. So you might have some person that comes in and might achieve 3 or 4 or 5 of these credentials. You might have a person that only gets 1 or 2. It just depends on letting them know the people that come out of this program have some level that's known of a skill set that is relatively robust based on the credentials they earn, and they have a solid foundation. Someone might come out of this and still need an OJT with an employer, which is fine. Many employers like to do things their own way and make sure that the employees are trained and do things the way they want them to. Perfectly acceptable. Someone could come out of this, get these credentials, and then build some OJT on top of that. That's a very solid program model. Okay. The occupational groups that we are targeting under ATM are these 4 that you see on the slide here. There are dozens of occupations within each of these large buckets, and there are competency lists that are on the ATM website that each occupation within the has assigned to it. These occupational competencies were vetted with manufacturers and against the credentials that are out there available now. How you are an employer that has higher level competencies that you need for your particular operation, add those to them as well. I mean, we're going to have a baseline of core competencies for all of these occupations, but if you have an employer situation that requires more precise work or great skill set, we can add that to the mix as well and a little bit extra training to make sure they get that. Okay, so that is it about ADAM. We now are going to transition over to the Rapid Response RFA that was released a couple days ago. The overall goal is pretty basic. We want to decrease unemployment, and we do that a couple of different ways. The best way, in my mind, is to help businesses avoid layoffs. And then the second one is also to help people that are already laid off or have been given a notice, the skill sets they need back into the workforce into a good paying job. So grants under this RFA will pay for skill upgrade training to do those two things. We want to make sure that we have linkages to employers so that we're not just training people in whatever we have trained them in, going in the past, but going forward, we want to make sure that we're training people that link up with jobs that are available in the area. So, and we're going to talk about this ad nauseum as we go through this, but we want to make sure that we have linkages both to the client pool, to solid training providers, and then direct linkages into jobs to the fullest extent possible. Okay. For those of you that have been around WIA, the top box is what we've always been able to do under rapid response. We go in when we hear of a layoff, either that has happened or is about to happen, and we provide a significant level of support to the individuals that are going through that process. And we get them signed up for the program, let them know what their options are, and basically try to give them a guiding hand as they go through the relatively traumatic experience of a mass layoff, and make sure that they know everything that's available to them and all the support systems that are out there, and help them get signed up if they are interested in taking advantage of them. Now, some new flexibility that we have from DOL was granted last year is to do incumbent worker training under rapid response funding. It does have to be tied to layoff aversion, though, and we are going to speak to that quite a bit as we go forward, too. Okay, so who can apply for grants? If you are one of these types of organizations, you are eligible to apply. It's relatively straightforward there. I don't really want to read these to everyone. I think everyone can see. So who can we serve then? Okay. We can serve WIA eligible dislocated workers. For those of you that are not steeped in Workforce Investment Act program activity, to be eligible as a dislocated worker, you need to be legal to work in the United States. If you're a male, compliant with selective service registration, 18 years or over, and generally on unemployment insurance, like receiving unemployment benefits, or have exhausted your unemployment benefits. There are a few other eligibility requirements that can come into play, but those are the basics. Of course, we have to do WIA eligibility on everyone that comes into the program as a dislocated worker. So we'll expect everyone to know how to do that if they are applying for a grant that serves those individuals. Also, individuals coming out of the military are considered a dislocated worker by virtue of coming back into civilian society or back into civilian life. So those are as well. And we'd really love to be able to serve returning veterans. So if you have access to clients or access to veterans that are coming home, we would certainly entertain applications that are targeting this group. We'll caution you that some grants that are out there already, and in talking with other individuals across the state and experts on the military, there are a lot of other programs that are set up to help veterans and they have certainly have their GI benefits as well. So we really need, if you want to go down this path of serving veterans that are coming out, we need you to have an established relationship with them already, and just don't think you can go out and round them up, because they are an elusive bunch of folks to find. So if you are planning on targeting returning veterans, we'll be looking at that very closely. Can participate as well. An incumbent worker is someone that is employed on a payroll, but in the use of rapid response funding, the individuals need to be at risk of layoff in order to be eligible. And we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. Yeah, I see a question flying in the chat room. Yeah, the map that I showed you earlier was strictly for the ATOM program. The Rapid Response RFA that we are talking about now is available statewide, just to make everyone clear on that. Okay, so let's talk more about this layoff aversion piece. Department of Labor says a layoff is averted when we either save a job or give someone the skill sets they need to do a different job either at the same employer or at a different employer. Basically what we're doing is the skill set that we're giving them keeps them employed. Doesn't matter if it's where they're at or at a different employer, but the bottom line is the training made a difference in helping keep them gainfully employed. Okay. There are a handful of layoff at-risk indicators that we ask everyone to identify for us. You need to select, if you're doing an incumbent worker training project, you need to select all that apply in your particular situation. The fifth one down, the worker lacks necessary skills, that is always in play. I mean, no matter what you're doing and what else is going on, the bottom line is that the worker doesn't have a skill set that is required for what the employer needs to have done. But there may be other factors as well that we need to know about. For example, some construction companies now are doing incumbent worker projects in some areas. And a common thing they're doing is they're expanding into BPI inspections for green and leads work. And basically that's a very easy upgrade for somebody with a construction background that knows their way in and out of buildings and how they're put together. So we can do a very quick training, get someone certified to do BPI inspections, and then the employer now has a whole new opportunity of making money, a new revenue stream that was not available to them before because their workers now have a new skill set. So the idea there is that some people that were at risk of layoff now won't be because they're able to do something that brings money into the employer. So just going through these real quickly, we ask that if you select any of these, and there will be, as part of the application, for you to give us some sort of description of why this is in play. We really are not interested in diving down into the books of employers, but if they're saying declining sales is a reason for wanting to do this training and why these people are at risk of layoff, you do need to have some explanation of what that entails. Let's see, what else here? Industry market trends, that's another one that is could be very relevant, especially in the healthcare industry. The Affordable Health Care Act is one that not everyone is, I don't know if anyone is sure how it's going to shake out, but we do know that some procedures that traditionally have been performed in hospitals will now be performed in long-term care facilities. So nursing homes and long-term care facilities are now seeking training for their nursing staff to upgrade their skills to do some of these procedures. Even though they're RNs already, they may not have even practiced these procedures for maybe a decade or more, so they want to make sure that the people have the skill sets to handle those procedures, because there will certainly be an economic impact to nursing homes and facilities if they are not able to perform those procedures in-house. So that's just one example of an industry or market trend that is happening. Okay, a couple questions have popped up. Are the layoff aspects needed only for? Yes. Yeah. Only incumbent worker projects are impacted by the layoff aversion element. And is employer? I would say usually yes. I mean, if all the other indicators are lining up and nothing, you're doing your due diligence and nothing smells bad, yeah. However, if you're seeing on one hand, at the company website, they're hiring a bunch of people, but yet they're claiming a huge loss of sales, well, that may be a factor to look at. And it's very possible. I mean, one part of the company may be growing. I mean, and then a different part could be contracting. I mean, it's very possible that situation is very legitimate and appropriate for our training funding, but it does merit a closer look. Oftentimes, especially for declining sales, some things that have come up have been in regard to ISO certifications. Now, typically, both the DOL and the state prefer, hands-on machining, tools, working machine operating skill sets, and the ISO certification kind of flirts with the line there a little bit, but we have seen instances where either someone above or below an employer in the supply chain will tell them, if you don't have a particular certification or a certain process in place, we will no longer do business with you. Okay, and so if a company is losing orders or is at risk of losing orders, then that certainly could bring layoffs into play. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen to the extent possible. The thing to keep in mind is that the training, if it is kind of goes into this sort of staff. I mean, if the whole company needs to know the process, then everybody in the company needs to, or at least everybody that needs to know it in the company needs to get the training as well. And you can employ train the trainer aspects to that. There are ways to make that happen, but we want to make sure that this isn't limited to like the upper management team at the employer, and that everybody that is appropriate understands what the processes are about and can implement them. Okay. Okay, this is kind of just rewording of what we've just talked about. Okay. So there are multiple types of training that we can do under rapid response funding. We've talked a little bit about incumbent worker already. We're going to go into it a little bit more here in a minute. And then these other three types are also available. We're going to talk about each of those here going forward. So again, an incumbent worker is somebody that is on payroll already. Under incumbent worker training, we ask the employers to contribute at least 10% of the training costs. And that contribution is negotiable based on the assessment of the employer's ability to pay. Typically, we would expect larger employers to pay a higher percentage. But again, you have to look at the situation, and it can be, you have flexibility. Also, employer wages paid while their employees are in training can count toward the match. So you could have a situation where the employer doesn't actually write a check for anything. He just pays the employers their salary while they're in training, and we call that good to go. And that's a great way to rack up that 10%, especially if you have a very small employer. Usually you can get to that 10% pretty quickly. Incumbent workers are not considered eligible for the WIA program, so you don't have to worry about WIA eligibility. They can be trained using our funding, but you don't have to mess with making sure they're eligible for the program, like the unemployed people or other dislocated workers are. We'll talk more about that going forward and try to clarify that. Okay, here's just a graphic explaining the sliding scale on the match. The larger the employer, the greater the match. Second type of training is on-the-job training, OJT. This is done primarily for short-term skill upgrade training, personalized to an individual to fill a skill gap they may have for the job. So in the case of OJT, an employer would hire the individual and take them on their payroll so that they become an employee of the manufacturer or the hospital or whoever the employer is. And then they know that they have a skill gap, but the training that the employer provides will fill that skill gap in a certain amount of time. And again, this is based on the individual's skill gap. So if you are pursuing an OJT project and apply for that, be mindful of not saying, okay, everybody is going to get a 3-month OJT. Because some individuals may have some or most of the skills they need already, and they might only need a 2-week OJT. However, someone else, you may come in at ground zero and not know hardly anything at all, and they might need 3 to 4 or 5 months. So again, it's tailored specifically to the individual. This is a really sweet deal for the employers. While the individual is in training, they can be reimbursed for the wages up to 90%, depending on the size of the employer. And this works similar to the incumbent worker sliding scale. The smaller the employer, the greater the wage reimbursement can be. Now, the difference between this and the incumbent worker also is that these individuals have to be eligible as a WIA dislocated worker. And that has implications for how you admit them and track them, and we report on them to the Department of Labor. So here's a graphic on the sliding scale. Okay. The third type of training is class size. This is most closely what we consider typical training, where a group of individuals will go to a class setting and work through a curriculum to get the understanding and skills that they need. We want this training to lead directly to job placement. Again, it's short term. We're really not looking for long-term degree programs, although there may be instances where that's appropriate. So if you do have a longer-term training program in mind, we really want to make sure that your linkage to an employer that will hire the individuals is very strong, so that folks don't sit through a very long training program and then are kind of left to fend for a job on their own. We want to make sure we have folks linked up to go right into employment to the fullest extent possible. You can use off-the-shelf curricula for class size training, but you can also offer that at non-traditional times or non-traditional delivery methods. So you could do online or blended learning, distance learning. You could offer it on nights and weekends. It's like, again, we want to be innovative in what we're doing under these grants, but sometimes the innovation is just offering something at a non-traditional time or a non-traditional venue. You can also include bridge programs in this type of training, and those are for individuals that have reading or math not where they need to be for technical skill training or for employment. So what we do is we give these folks some education and training in reading and math as needed that is contextualized for the sector they're going into. So it's like they're learning it for the job that they are hopefully going into. So it definitely helps contextualize the learning and give them a better understanding of what it's about and lets them know how they're going to apply it. And in some cases, individuals can bump up 3 or 4 grade levels very quickly by using a bridge program if it's necessary. And again, individuals taking class size training need to be WIA dislocated worker eligible. Innovation. So if you're offering it at a traditional time and setting and you're using an off-the-shelf curriculum, then there needs to be some other innovation element at play that we can learn from and then apply it to the program on a larger scale going forward. Okay, and the last type is customized training. And this is training, as the name suggests, that is tailored to an individual or group of employers' needs. Because the training is tailored to an employer's needs, we ask them to contribute a larger percentage of the training cost, at least 50%. And the employer needs to agree to hire successful completers of the program. And again, that's because we have taken lots of extra effort to design something specifically for an employer. We need their partnership and agreement that folks that successfully complete the training can go into a job with that employer. And if they're training employees that they have on board already, it needs to be targeted at these particular activities that are shown here in the dot points, like new technologies, new procedures, or upgrading jobs that require new skills. Now, you may ask, well, what is the difference between that and an incumbent worker? Well, the difference is incumbent workers are folks that have, they're working at the employer, they're at risk of layoff. Under customized training, the individuals are no longer at risk of layoff. Under rapid response funding, they would have already been given a layoff notice. So that is the main difference between the two. If anybody has any questions on that, we can go forward. Bonnie asked a question here, are current employees eligible for OJT? Not OJT, but certainly incumbent worker training. So they can get training and they are on the job, but it's not OJT in the context of the WIA program where the individual is hired on with a skill gap and then provide training. Again, these are the rules we're operating under, so if you are embarking on an incumbent worker project, you do have to have as many of these at-risk indicators that apply checked and give us an explanation for each. Okay, then Jose asked, how does off-the-shelf training relate to college curricula? It could be a college curricula. It could be the curricula from a private sector training provider. Could be the curricula that an employer themselves have developed or have bought themselves and use. And like every person that comes through that employer's to be hired, you get this particular type of training so that it's learned the way the employer wants it learned. Okay. On the reporting side, reporting is the same for everything except incumbent workers. If you're doing an incumbent worker project, we have an online system that you can enter the employers that are participating, the individuals, the training they're taking, when they're taking it, when they start it, when they complete it, and all that client management information goes into a web-based system. Then you would give us your monthly cost reporting. Costs are typically reported by the 20th of each month for the prior month, and then a quarterly report every calendar quarter on program activity. For everything else, you need to enter individuals into our workforce development system, our client management system. That includes eligibility determinations, what services they're going to get, any case notes, and then outcomes for the individuals. Plus, they also have to be linked to a dislocation event. That's our DETS dislocation event tracking system. So you can link, groups of individuals from different events together under one project, or it may be appropriate to approach DCEO about creating a DETS event for your particular project that may impact, a particular sector of the economy. So we have some flexibility about creating a DETS event if one is not out there already. And then, of course, these also have the same monthly and quarterly cost reporting requirements. Jose asks, are college programs and courses considered off the shelf? Yeah, I mean, if they've been developed already, yes. I mean, if the curricula is already out there, then yeah, that's off the shelf. And there's no problem using that. I mean, we really are not going toward spending to encourage folks to think that they can embark on, a 6 to 9, 12-month process to develop a new curricula. We want to get people trained as quickly as absolutely possible. Okay, this slide gives each of the 4 types of training and then kind of lays out visually the information we've been talking about for the last few minutes or so. And it's really there just to try to put it all on one page so you can see which factors apply to each type of training. Okay, MOUs. As we've spoken about, one of the key factors in any kind of training you're doing here that is not incumbent worker training is making sure that the individuals are eligible for the WIA program as a dislocated worker, and that you have the ability to track them through the reporting system that exists out there. There are already WIA local workforce areas, training providers out there that know how to do this. If you are not embarking on an incumbent worker training project, we need to see that there is some sort of linkage to an entity that understands and has a good history of doing WIA eligibility determinations and can track clients in the workforce development system going forward. We can provide some training to get folks better up to speed on that if necessary, but really if you're coming in totally cold on that, this is not something that you really probably should jump into lightheartedly, because if the eligibility is done correctly, if the documentation that is required is not there, if things aren't done in the right order, it can lead to what we call disallowed costs, which have to be replaced by non-federal funding. So that's a very tough conversation to have with anybody, to say, ooh, we accidentally let some people in that weren't eligible, and now we got to come up with a lot of money to repay the program. So we want to not put anyone in a position where they're at risk of having that happen to them. On the other side, for incumbent worker projects, you do not have to worry about WIA eligibility. That is much more straightforward to handle and track. So if you're an employer or an employer group that does not have a history with WIA eligibility, you may want to focus your attention on incumbent worker projects. But if you do have relationships with organizations that can do that WIA eligibility for you, by all means, you're welcome to apply. But we just want to make sure that somebody that is involved in the process has already agreed to sign on board that they are going to handle that for the process. We don't want to, if an application comes in and says, well, we are going to reach out to somebody to handle that, we need a stronger commitment than that. We want to know that that entity has already been approached, has already agreed to handle it, and you figured out how you're going to make that happen going forward. Sue Clark asks, do we have a sample MOU? I'm sure we could find one. I don't have one off the shelf that I could hand to you right now, but I will endeavor to see if we have one of those. I know they're out there, so we will check into that. That's a good question. Okay. Pam is asking, can you please summarize? Pam, the only difference between incumbent worker training under this funding and through the regular WIA formula grant is that more entities are eligible to apply for this funding. So an employer association or an employer could apply directly, but otherwise it would work just the same. Okay, we have some fiscal slides. Okay, well, Matt has typed a question here. No, Matt, if you're a WIA-funded agency and are already doing WIA eligibility determinations and have access to the IWDS system and have a history of providing case notes and doing all the client tracking, then no, you don't need to have an MOU. I know this is relevant in Cook County where most of those services are outsourced anyway. So across the rest of the state, usually the LWIA is the individual that, or the organization that is providing the training or directly handling that. But up in your area, since all of that is outsourced, if you're already a WIA provider with a contract with the local workforce area, no, you don't need to have an MOU with the LWIA. Because basically you're doing what you ordinarily do for them anyway. Okay. The cost principles applicable to this RFA and this funding are listed here. If you are already a WIA provider or workforce area, then you know these already. If you are not, you need to make sure that your accounting staff or business office takes a look at these and understands how they work. Essentially, if you've handled federal funding before, you probably have everything in place to handle this, because these are applicable across all the different federal funding sources. But if you've never handled federal funding directly before, then you want to make sure you take a look at these and get familiar with them, because we will hold you to the standards that are laid out here. There's some administrative requirements as well, and a third slide of requirements. You have to provide us with a single audit, have to certify if you engage in any lobbying activity, are you EEO, are you a drug-free workplace, etc. Okay, so costs that are appropriate to be charged to the grant are relatively simple. Basically, they have to be necessary to achieve the grant objectives, and the costs have to be reasonable and a prudent use of the funding, so that basically someone that has their wits about them would look at it and say, yeah, that looks reasonable. But we want to avoid the obvious abuses, like $600 hammers that were in vogue at the Pentagon back in the 1970s and early 80s. Those are the kind of things we want to avoid, because this is the people's money, so we want to make sure that it's being spent wisely and appropriately. Many grants have this, but it may happen that there could be approval conditions in the grant you receive. If conditions are in there, this is just saying that before you go out and start spending money, if one of these conditions exists, you just need to check in. There is an approval condition in your grant. It will be pointed out to you when you receive it. So there will be no gray area there. If you have that as part of your grant, you will know it. Okay. And of course, there are some things that is just never good business. In fact, either it's against the regs or illegal to use the funding in this manner. First of all, we don't use our funding to attract new businesses. That just creates a a zero-sum shell game where we may provide jobs in our area, but we cause layoffs somewhere else. So, federal funding, cannot be used for that. We don't pay to schmooze and wine and dine folks to get them convinced to be partners with us. And of course, we don't cover prior losses or any fines and penalties or set up rainy day funds with WIA funding. Now, services have to be procured. Now, there are many ways to go about that, but you do have to follow the process that is already in place at your organization. If your organization does not have a procurement policy or process in place, then I encourage you to get one in place before you apply for the grant, or partner up with a grantee that can apply on your behalf, and you can partner up and go about it that way. The thing to keep in mind is, again, we want to ensure that the taxpayers' funding is being spent wisely and prudently, and procurement is the way to ensure that happens. People often ask, well, what about if I have a partner that is in this project with me? Do I have to procure their services? And the question there is, well, it depends. First of all is, you have to ask yourself, DOL calls this, are they partner with a big P or a partner with a little p? Partner with a big P, capital P, means that if that partner was not at the table, the project would not happen. And vice versa, the lowercase p partner is a partner that is adding value to the process, but there's some other entity or organization in the region that could also do it as well. Okay, so you just have to keep that in mind as you're approaching this on what level of partnership is this organization, and does it rise to the level of we couldn't do this without them. Now, procurement can also involve sole sourcing. If there's only one organization that is available to do it, that's sometimes an appropriate procurement process. Doesn't mean you don't procure it. It just means that you go through the process and document that this organization is the only one. We've looked around, we've tested the market, and there's no other individual that can do this. If an employer has a proprietary training program or a proprietary piece of equipment and they have their own trainers that they want to use, that is certainly appropriate for a sole sourcing because there's no one else out there that can do it. Okay. So how do you get your money? You incur the costs, then report the cost into our reporting system, and then we will reimburse you and write checks back to you based on the cost that you report. Typically, you will report costs at least once a month by the 20th of the month for the prior month. So like for March expenditures, March costs would be reported by April 20th. You can report them before then if you like, but they have to be reported by the 20th. Reimbursements can be prorated if for some reason the grant is really struggling to get anywhere close to its numbers. One of the innovation factors that we are looking at from the state perspective is we want to be paying for results, not effort. Okay, so that means we're going to be looking at mainly, did you train the number of people that you said you were going to train, and what were the outcomes for those people? And there's some different factors for the different types of training. So for an incumbent worker training, we're going to see, did you come close to the number of people that you said you were going to train, and then how many of those people were successful completers of that training. So again, if you came in and said you were going to do 100 people and ended up doing 12, well then expect that there's going to be some proration of the grant. But if you get in the ballpark of the target, you should be okay. We will certainly be having ongoing discussions with any grantee that is looks like they're having issues getting up close to the target. So, no one would be surprised by this. That would only happen after an ongoing dialogue and as a last resort when we've determined that despite whatever corrective actions might have been taken, it's just going to happen the way it was envisioned when the grant was submitted, which sometimes that happens under innovation. That's part of the process. Okay. Under OJT, again, we're going to look at, did you come close to the target that you had for us, and how many folks entered permanent employment upon completion of OJT. And when I say entering permanent employment, technically the intent is when they're found by the employer, that is their permanent job, and the OJT, if completed successfully, they stay on board with that. But for purposes of our system, while they're in OJT, they're in a service called private sector OJT. When the OJT is completed, then they're flipped into employment. So it's kind of a technical term for how we track people in our system. But again, the idea is when they're hired, the intent is that the employer is going to keep them on. If you are working with an employer, make sure they understand that OJT is not subsidized employment. And while not all individuals successfully complete training, if we see a pattern of individuals making it almost all the way through training before they decide they haven't quite got there, we don't want to be put in the situation where they're cycling people through. So, make sure employers understand that if they're participating in this, the intention is when they hire somebody, they intend to keep them on board forever. Well, as far as forever goes in the private sector anyway. Okay. Of the folks that enrolled in training, did 85% of those enter training-related employment? And the reason I have enrolled in training underlined here is that, say you said you were going to do 20 people, and you get 20 people enrolled on the grant, but only 2 actually enroll in any kind of training. Well, that's outside, what we're trying to get done here. These are all about skill training upgrades. So we expect that people that come into the program will be enrolled in training. And in fact, people should not be enrolled in the grant at all until you figured out, okay, yeah, this person is eligible and appropriate for training, and when you enroll them, training is going to happen pretty quickly. We don't want people just enrolled on the grant languishing without ever having been enrolled in training. So that's why there's really only 2 factors that come into play. How many people got enrolled in training that you said you were going to admit, and then did 85% or more of those people get a permanent job out of it? If you're a local workforce area applying and have a performance rate for entering employment that's already negotiated, we'll use the rate that you have out there. But for everybody else, the target's 85%. And if we're doing customized training, then we expect that the folks would be, if they're already working for that employer, that they are retained for 90 days, or they enter permanent employment at a new employer based on the training that they got. So how do you do a successful application? Before we jump on, I see a question here. Susan is asking, is there a minimum amount of time a person needs to remain on the job? Believe it's 90, there's 90 and 3/4 retention. So yes, it's standard WIA retention. So, we look at that 1/4 after their training is over, and then again, I believe 3/4 after. And I'll get that verified. But yes, it's the standard follow-up. That's a good question. Okay, so when you're filling out your application, what are we going to be looking at? What do you need to do to make sure you have the best application you can? Well, the first one's very basic. Just make sure you complete it fully. Fill in all the boxes, and while we don't grade by the word or by weight, we do need a full understanding of what it is that you are doing. So my advice is write as much as you need to that explains what you're doing and kind of answers all the basic questions, but don't just drone on for volumes and volumes. Be concise and succinct, but complete. We're also going to look to make sure that applicants have a demonstrated capacity to manage federal funding, and if they've done training in the past, they have a good track record in achieving the outcomes that they have said they were going to do in the past. And again, it's very key that if you're doing non-incumbent worker training, you either know how to do WIA eligibility determinations and case management and all the things that go with it, or you are partnered up with someone that does know how to do that. And I want to caution folks about, don't feel like you can hire somebody off the street that may have worked in another program doing case management. Yes, there are some things that are common to all case management, but case managers dealing with the WIA program need to have a background in the WIA program. Too many things can go wrong if your case managers don't understand WIA. So we don't want to put folks in that position to be at risk. So make sure that if you do go that route to handle your eligibility, that the people you're working with, make definite sure that they have a background in WIA. And recently, WIA is even better. And then we also want to make sure that you have an access to a viable client pool, and that if you're not an employer, that you have a direct relationship with employers. We would look more favorably upon a grant application that has partners involved that provide a client flow from the demand side, or I'm sorry, the supply side, and then direct long-standing relationships with employers or employer groups that handle the demand side of the equation. All pieces of the equation need to be in place. Want to make sure the activities you're describing to us are aligned with the RFA. Don't do something that isn't in line with what the RFA says we're trying to get done. And then also the quality and the detail of your work plan. And of course, is the money that you are asking for to complete the project in line with typical training? If you're doing something innovative, that might be more expensive. You need to explain why that's the case, just to make sure that we understand it. And then if you're a local workforce area that wants to apply, you need to be on track to meet your established expenditure requirements and obligation rates. And we want to make sure that you're in good shape as far as spending down your regular DW money. Just want to caution folks, don't chase funding just because it's out there, and then wind up in a situation where you have funding, but for whatever reason, don't have either the employers or the client pool in place to spend it down. So we want to make sure that you take care of first things first. Okay. So these three elements have to be in place for the application even to be considered. So we would expect a pretty good explanation of each of these three elements. Just check these off. Clients, do we got them? Okay. How are we going to get them? And again, to be most favorably considered, it needs to be an established pool of people you're going to choose from, and not a case where you say, well, we're going to partner with XYZ, we're going to go and round up these folks and find them later. We want to make sure that you've got a client pool established and have access to them so that the clients are already there and waiting. record. Whoops, let me get rid of that. And then employers that are hiring and on board. And this is the trickiest part, if you're not an employer, is to make sure that you are leveraging past relationships. New relationships are fine too, but if your project is all about brand new relationships that you're going to go out and cultivate, that is probably, well, it's not probably, that's definitely much weaker application than somebody you've already been working with and providing clients to or providing training to, and they have a history of taking your students or taking your completers into their workplace. So if you've got that already established and can show us that, and both parties are partner to the application and attest to that, then that's a much stronger application. Okay. On the budget side, be clear and concise, be appropriate and reasonable, and you'll be in good shape. Again, regarding the taxpayers' funding here, so we want to make sure that the funding is appropriate and reasonable. Generally, under this RFA, the maximum award is going to be $350,000. If you come in for more than that, that the amount could be prorated down, or if you are coming in for that, then we would expect very strong relationships in all three of those items on our checklist here. If you're coming in for that much money, we want really strong, in fact, the strongest evidence of these kinds of relationships in place. And again, just make sure you respond to all elements of the RFA, and don't wait too long. The deadline is April 24th to receive full consideration. You may apply after the deadline, but for full consideration, you need to come in by April 24th. We will consider additional applications as long as funding is available, but again, depending on how many applications come in, funding could be allocated very quickly. So we encourage that April 24th date, try to meet that to the fullest extent possible. Jose is asking, can you attach pages that ask for other state grants? Yes. Yeah, if there's not room in the application box itself, you can attach a page. However, the box should expand as you're adding text. So if try that first before going through the attachments. There is an online resource for this. You've probably found that already if you signed up for this webinar, but in case not, we will have the questions that have been asked at these presentations we've done across the state put online with responses there. There are some existing responses, Q&A out there now. We'll be going through those here very quickly and making sure that information from the prior RFA is updated for information from this one. But again, if you have a question or think of something later, go to this website and submit your question, and responses will be posted as soon as possible. Usually we get to that in the same day, but sometimes it takes a day or two depending on how complicated the question or answer might be. But we do try to get those to those as soon as possible. And that's my name and number and email. And if you have questions for the rapid response side, here is the web link or the web address for that piece. And if you are interested in learning more about the ADAM initiative, that website is listed there as well. So that is the end of the presentation, but I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have through the chat box while we're here. So Keith is asking, is the deadline for IW training April 24th? Yes, it is. And I didn't mention it specifically, but it is listed in the RFA on page 8. We're looking for project periods starting roughly in July 1, and they could go for up to 2 years. The funding is viable for 2 years. Typically, we look at 1-year training projects, but if you have a specific need that needs to go longer than that, just spell out in your application, why the training needs to go that long. Okay, let me read Jeff's question here. It could be either, Jeff. It could be a mass layoff event, or you could group individuals that were impacted by smaller layoffs. Either is fine. And while Keith is typing, I want to address the one element of the layoff aversion. Some employers may be reluctant to put in writing and come right out and say that employee A, B, and C are going to lose their jobs without getting this training. But the reality is that the company is at risk of having layoffs because they need to do some skill upgrade training. A way that they can word that passes muster is to say that the employee accomplish, we will need workers that have those skill sets. So essentially they're saying that we need people to have these skills, and the people that we have now don't have them. And if the people that we have now don't get the skill, then we'll have to find people that do have the skill. So they don't need to name individuals, but they do need to at least give us, give us that attestation that the skill sets that their workforce has right now are inadequate for the purposes that they need, either to expand their business or take orders or essentially remain competitive. Yes, the 350 maximum award is applicable to incumbent worker also. That'd be a pretty big incumbent worker training project to use up that kind of funding, though. That would be typically hundreds of workers. I also want to point out that the application form for the rapid response funding is at the website. Please use that form. That form is required by the DCEO accounting and accountability offices. So, don't just go through the RFA and respond to the issues in the RFA on a Word document and send that in. We need to have the official application filled out. But all of the elements that are part of the RFA are in the application. So, you just fill out that application and you are good to go. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, so I thank you all for your participation. If you have any further questions or think of anything else after reviewing the webinar or looking at the RFA, please submit them online at the WIA Rapid Response link, and we will respond to those. And everybody should be checking in on those as That way everyone has access to the responses that might help you put together a stronger application. So the reason for doing that is making sure everybody has all the information on an equitable level. So that will be the process. Good luck. We appreciate your interest, and we will look forward to seeing the applications that come in the next couple of weeks. Take care. Have a great day, everyone.